Hello, everyone. YouTube has been interesting lately, specifically in my recommendations. For the past few weeks, they've been recommending me music like Hi Ren by Ren and a lot of NF's music, which I definitely appreciate. And if you've listened to either of those artists, you may be sensing a theme with what YouTube is presenting, but more on that as we go through this. YouTube has been recommending other videos as well, though, all of which are kind of dealing with the topic of mental health. You know, talks from people about how they've been friendless their entire adult life, or how they're struggling with depression, or the how people are coping with rejection in their main life, things like that. Now, all of this could just be happenstance. I don't know what's going on in the YouTube algorithm. I don't think any person on earth does. But it also seems pretty obvious that these topics are relevant to a lot of people today because there's a lot of videos about it if they're showing up on my feed. So it got me thinking about this topic because I've personally gone through a lot of dark times, specifically dark in terms of mental health. And the the really interesting bit on that is, at least for me right now, I I don't feel any of those dark times. Like, I can empathize with the videos I watch. I can feel the passion in the lyrics from Ren or NF. There are songs that they definitely get me to tear up as I hear them. And my heart breaks when I hear some of the videos of other creators expressing their pain and turmoil that they've been going through. And I remember exactly how it feels to be in those dark areas. But it's just that I remember it. I don't experience it now. And it's actually a bit shocking to me to realize this because I wouldn't say I've cured my depression or that I've been cured of it. Nothing like that. It's just that for the last 2 years or so, I don't think I have been depressed. Not for maybe a day or two at most in the coldest, deepest, darkest days of January, maybe. And again, it's not like I've not been exposing myself to sad things. I've been listening to those songs, for example. And I've made videos about Ukraine. So I'm clearly following news that has a very dark and horrific aspect to it. These definitely would have triggered a lot of those feelings of despair that I have been accustomed to. But it's just not happening this time around. Now, if you are currently struggling with depression, what I'm saying here, this could seem like a pipe dream. Or you may in fact just be thinking that I don't really know what I'm talking about. Everybody's felt sad, and you might be thinking you've just felt sad and you've not actually been depressed. You don't know what it's like to have experienced the depths of depression that you might be feeling. And it's true that I don't know what you personally are feeling, but believe me, I know what depression is. And one of the things I know about it is that it is very great, is very skilled at isolating you and making you feel like you're the only person who's ever felt the way you do, that you're alone in your fight, that you are unique in a bad way. So I felt that maybe it was worth taking some time to share a bit of my journey, because I'm hopeful that if you're struggling with depression right now, that maybe what I'm telling you can give a little bit of hope, because I've come through and currently am not struggling with that and haven't for the last couple of years. So where would I begin? This is the problem. So I guess I will start by going through the same way that I found out I first had depression. So that was in 2006. Now, this is not when I first felt depression, no, but this is when I found out that I had depression, that it got the name depression. See, what I first found out, I thought I had insomnia. If you've never experienced insomnia, The movie Fight Club actually is a fairly decent summary of that. The way that they describe insomnia in the movie fits. Like it Fight Club became my spirit animal during these times. It is the closest thing to hell that I can imagine. It's not so much that there's a lot of physical pain. There is a little bit of pain. Your eyes burn. You feel tired all the time. You're always exhausted when you have insomnia. But I've experienced worse physical pain, like when I had my wisdom teeth pulled, or when my worst pain in any specific moment is when I sprained my ankle. But all of that pain was intense. It was sharp. It was isolated, and it was limited to the moment. It was with the sprained ankle 6 weeks later, I was fine. With the wisdom teeth, it was like 3 days of needing painkillers and then fine after that. I was really fine after about the second day, if I'm remembering correctly. But my insomnia lasted months and months. And I believe it was about 8 months in total. It was the better part of a year. And here's how it would typically go when I was struggling with the insomnia. So because I was tired, I would tend to go to bed around 10 p.m. Normally now, I've always been a night owl, so I go to bed around midnight most nights. But I was trying to catch up on sleep, so I would be exhausted. I would go to bed about 10. I was exhausted, but as soon as my head hit the pillow, I would snap alert, and I would be staring up at the ceiling. Again, my eyes are burning. They're burned because of the extreme exhaustion. So I would close them. And as soon as I did, I would feel the whole room start to spin. And it was like a sense of vertigo. I felt like I was falling into myself. So I would snap my eyes right back open to stop that vertigo. And so then I would be laying staring at the ceiling again. I would turn, I'd lay on my side. I'd use extra pillows. I'd get rid of my pillows. I'd lay flat on the floor. I would sleep with an ice pack, or I'd use a heating pad. Nothing worked. So I would glance at the clock and watch as it slowly updated its red digits. And when the 4-digit number suddenly turned into a 3-digit number, I would feel the sense of despair of knowing I've been laying in bed, not sleeping, for 3 hours already. And I still wouldn't know when I was going to sleep. One particular night, I remember looking at the clock, and I saw it was 1:26 in the morning. So I closed my eyes and I felt myself doze off, and I slept for hours and hours and hours. I woke up feeling my head pounding. The world was spinning, but I could tell it wasn't yet morning because I didn't have curtains on the windows. So there's nothing to block the sunlight, and there was no bright lights in my face. So I knew it was still dark, but I didn't know exactly what time it was. So I cracked my eyes open and looked at the clock, and it said 1:42. I remember I went to sleep for hours at 1:26, but it was less than 15 minutes in reality. This lasted again 8 months of sleeping like that. It was so bad at one point, I was house sitting for my uncle, and it was a weekend, so I didn't have to worry about work. But at one point, I got up, I walked down to the 7-Eleven because I wanted a big gulp. I was thirsty and wanted some caffeine. So on the way back from 7-Eleven, going back to his house, I remember it was only about a 3-block walk, and I had a literal out-of-body experience. My consciousness popped out of my head. I was suddenly looking at myself as if I was on a video game screen. Like I was controlling myself in third person from the camera. I could see myself like about 5 feet up and behind, looking down on me as I was walking. I remember walking under a tree, and I could see the branches hitting me in the face as I was walking under them, but I didn't feel the branches at all. And now, as I'm thinking back on it, I don't know if I actually walked under a tree and was getting hit with the branches, or if that was just my vision, my hallucination of seeing it from this third person, because obviously I wasn't really out of my body, even though I felt I was. All I know is that by the time I got to my uncle's house, again, about 3 blocks later, I was back in first person view, ever grateful for that. And I basically just stayed in the house the rest of the weekend. I didn't want to leave because that terrified me. It was not an experience I would recommend at all. And so it turns out that after 8 months of this, well, I'd been going to a psychiatrist at the time because, I've been needing help, obviously, for my insomnia. So he'd given me every medication under the sun, including some really, really powerful antipsychotic medications that had sleepiness as a side effect, fatigue, and all of that. And then, of course, I had to get prescribed Adderall to counteract all the side effects so that I could be awake during the day. And then, of course, there were tons of antidepressants on top of this, all this. So 8 months of experimenting with all these different really super powerful medications. And after that 8 months, I went to my general practitioner for my annual physical. And after he took one blood test for my annual physical, he looked at me and said, "I think you've got sleep apnea because you have way too many red blood cells. Even at the high altitude, because I live in Colorado, it's like, even at this altitude, this is ridiculous. You look like somebody who's sleeping on the side of Mount Everest. That's how many red blood cells you've got. I don't think you're getting enough oxygen while you're asleep, so you have sleep apnea." Now, of course, you can't prescribe it from blood. You have to actually do a sleep test. Well, he gave me the sleep test papers. I went to the hospital, got the sleep test done. And during that sleep test, I had 6 hours of sleeping on my own, and then they ended it with 2 hours of being on a CPAP. For that 6 hours, I stopped breathing 178 times. I never got past stage 2 sleep. I only hit REM when they put me on the CPAP. And since my symptoms of insomnia had been for 8 months by that point, it's not unreasonable to think that it had been 8 months since I'd had any REM sleep. I don't know if you remember the episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where the Enterprise crew couldn't get any REM sleep and went crazy. But yeah, that was basically what had happened to me. Now, it would be easy to get extra critical of my psychologist in this because he's giving me all these medications. Why didn't he just check for a physical ailment like my regular doctor did? But the truth is, while I've been focusing on this, the reality is I had enough baggage that I had been going through that made me think the insomnia was mental. It was caused by a mental issue, not a physical issue. So that was what I had thought. So I didn't even think of checking for a physical cause when I went to the psychologist. So, the depression didn't come out of a vacuum. It came out of some severe trauma that I had gone through, specifically from being bullied while I was in elementary school. Now, I'm going to discuss some of what I went through. So I'm going to give a trigger warning for any of those who might be listening who've ever been bullied. But you'll be able to see from this why the fact that I had insomnia made me believe it was a mental issue causing it instead of a physical ailment once you hear some of the details. I'm not going to use any real names in this for the record as well, but the gist is this. So I went to elementary school in a very small town. We were a 1A school. The entire school consisted of 2 wings of a building separated by a gymnasium in the middle. And the elementary kids, K through 8th grade, were in one wing, and then the high school was in the other. For the first couple of years, everything was normal. I had 2 best friends at the time. One guy, I'll call him Brian, and the other guy I will call Sam. Again, these are not real names. But Brian, he was a lot like me in that we were both pretty large guys, both a bit overweight. Sam was pretty much the opposite. He was a super scrawny kid. Brian, the big guy, he gave me my first comic book I ever owned. It was a Garfield comic, back when Garfield was actually still funny. But yeah, my best friend would have been Sam, the scrawny little guy. He taught me how to ride a bike, for example. He brought his brother's bike over to my house, and I rode it on the slope of the driveway until I could do it without crashing. So, things were pretty normal. But then 5th grade happened. And to this day, I don't know exactly how things changed. I just know that they changed. Every time one of the boys would pass by my desk, they would punch me as hard as they could in the arm, or shove my books off onto the floor. And when I say the boys, it was literally every single one of the boys in class that would do this, including Brian and Sam. Additionally, were all the insults. Obviously, a big part of it was because I was overweight, so I got every fat joke under the sun made for me. And when it came to the insults, it wasn't just the boys who were doing that. Most of the girls joined in from time to time as well. My experience is that none of them stayed out of it. That could just be me thinking back now. There probably was one or two girls that weren't like that, but my memory is everybody now in the class always did it. And these insults weren't just, my size. I was always academically oriented. I've always been more of a mental person. So I was relentlessly teased for being a nerd. And this was before being a nerd was considered somewhat cool. And this became a lose-lose for me because, if I was right on a test, it was because I was a know-it-all. But if I got a question wrong when the teacher asked me, then I would get the whole, I thought you were supposed to be smart. Like, who are you? I won't say the other words that go along with it because of YouTube guidelines, but I'll just say the bullying extended beyond my class. So when I was on the playground during lunch recess, it was everybody from kindergarten. And it wasn't just my class making fun of me. It was everybody on the school playground at that point. I spent most of my time during lunch recess hiding, because if the boys weren't all playing a game of football, then they were usually trying to find rocks to throw at me or sticks or things like that. And occasionally 2 or 3 of them would get caught by the teacher, and they would get sent up against the wall where they'd have to sit at the base of the wall during recess instead of playing. And there they would just shout taunts at me the whole time. They would point out where I was hiding if they could see me from their angle, things like that. And I've made this point to other people before, but I don't think ever in a video. But I'll just say this. You know the whole sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yeah, that's bullshit. You know how I know? Because I can remember getting hit with rocks, but I don't feel what it was like when I remember it. I don't feel the impact, but I can hear the words that they were chanting right now. Like, I can actually repeat the same phrases that they were taunting me with. And the impact of those words is exactly the same today as it was when they said it, in terms of the mocking, the scorn, all of that stuff, the acid that was there on the lips that they spoke. It's all still there. That's something that you can't do with a stick or a stone. Anyway, towards the end of my 5th grade year, a 4th grader pushed me into the fence, and we both got in trouble for fighting. Yeah, I got sent to the principal's office for the crime of getting shoved into a fence and scraping my arm against the side of the fence. I didn't even push back. Now, I actually didn't care, because what they did at the time is they made us both spend the afternoon in the principal's office. So we didn't go to class, but because we were just sitting there, they let us read a book, and I was in the middle of reading The Hobbit. And so I had a lot of fun because I just kept reading The Hobbit. And the kid who shoved me into the fence asked me, "What's that book you're reading?" So I told him and started explaining about Middle Earth and all this stuff. And remember, this is before the movies came out. The only movie at the time that existed for The Hobbit was that dumb cartoon that was made, that it looks like somebody who was tripping on LSD decided to come up with that cartoon, if you remember it. But anyway, the kid that shoved me into the fence, he ended up asking if he could go to the library and get a copy of it because he wanted to read it too, and he was allowed to. So we spent the afternoon after this happened where we just read The Hobbit. So this incidentally brings me to on one hand, it's the hardest part. It's also just the weirdest part of this whole thing, because there was a definite dichotomy going on. Everyone in my class bullied me, but outside of class, I still had Sam as my best friend. See, I lived a block away from the school, right? So I would just walk to school and back. But the kids in town knew where I lived. They knew where the school was. So they would wait for me after school. And it was basically me running the gauntlet to get home before they would attack me. So I came up with various tricks to, exit through the high school wing instead of the elementary side, and to run home before they could catch me on the street, and things of that nature. Well, every day, Sam would be one of the guys punching me in the arm, calling me the names, throwing my books in the trash, tearing up my library books so I get fines, chasing me down in the hall. Then, 30 minutes after school had ended, when all the kids had gone home and nobody was on the streets looking for me anymore, Sam would come over and knock on the door, and we'd be best friends. We would ride bikes again, or we'd go over to his house and play video games, since his family had a video game system back then when my family didn't. And I just remember one time my aunt was visiting, and I was talking about Sam. Again, Sam's not his real name. I was talking about him, and I mentioned that, yeah, Sam's my after-school friend. And I remember there's kind of a look of horror on my aunt's face. And she kind of looked at me and she's like, an after school friend isn't a real friend at all. And I just remember kind of being like, yeah, whatever. You don't know what you're talking about. And the reality was that what she didn't realize is the after school friend was the only friend that I had. I didn't have any friends at school, so I had to settle for the after school friend. And Sam once told me that he was really sorry that he made fun of me and he punched me and all that when he was at school, but he had to look tough in front of the other guys. And the thing is, I got that logic. I understood what he meant. I remember the summer between 5th and 6th grade being one of optimism, because there was no school. Sam and I were just friends all day long, every day. And then when school started up for 6th grade, I remember that first day when I headed in hoping all the kids had forgotten that they'd been mean to me at the end of the last year and they would instead be nice. And, of course, that lasted about 37 seconds. And then 6th grade was the same hell that 5th grade had been. But the thing is, while all this is happening, right now, I honestly don't hold animosity in my heart towards those classmates, because it's just like what Sam has said. He wasn't doing it to be malicious. They weren't really doing it to be malicious. It was like it was some kind of sick habit that everybody had to do, not with ill intent. And I know that makes no sense, but it does make sense too. I mentioned the kid from the lower class who would push me into the fence, and then we read The Hobbit, right? It reminds me of well, first of all, I should point out the school knew full well what was going on. I may have been the only student in the history of the universe to have been told by the principal or superintendent, or I'm not sure exactly who it was. It was somebody in charge of the school. But they literally told me, and I will quote this to the best of my ability, the words that were said. It was basically, Peter, when kids get into a fight on school property, we have to suspend them for 3 days. It doesn't matter the reason. Do you understand? And I kind of remember just nodding. I get it. And then this woman continues saying, if you get in a fight, I will not suspend you. With the zero tolerance policy, literally they were saying, fight for yourself and defend yourself. We will not suspend you. I'll just say the 80s were a different time. What can I say on there? But anyway, the reason I bring this up is I made friends with the kid who pushed me into the fence and we read The Hobbit. Sam, I gotta remember the names. Sam was always apologizing that he had to beat me up and make fun of me because he really actually liked me. And the one here that it took me the longest to figure out, because it still really doesn't make sense to me, is the day that Brian, the guy who was the big guy like me. I gotta remember this is a problem with fake names. But yeah, Brian. This was the only time I ever actually came close to fighting back. because after school one day, Brian pushed me into the fence when I was trying to get home. I was running the gauntlet, and he managed to get me, shoved me. I hit the side of the fence, and it tore through my coat. And I remember looking down and seeing all this fluffy cotton just coming out of my sleeve. And I knew my mom was going to have to sew the coat. And this is a bit tough to say, but see, I didn't care when I got shoved into the fence and when my skin was cut. The cuts and the bruises, that's not important, but now my mom is going to have to spend time and effort to fix a perfectly good coat because of what this kid had done. So I climbed to my feet because I'd fallen to the ground after this, and my fists were clenched. I took a step towards Brian, ready to go. And before I continue, I'll just say, my mom, when I got home and I was crying about the coat, my mom's like, I don't care about the coat. I care about you. So it's not like my mom was the reason on this. Just, I'm giving you the mindset though. But I was there. I was getting ready to go. Fist ready. And one of the other kids there, I'll just call him Tim. Gonna run out of names here. He put out his hand like that, just right on my chest. And he said, Peter, no, I don't want to see you get hurt. I don't want to see you get hurt. This is I realized I forgot to tell this same kid months before brought a rolled up coil of wire to school. It was about 5 pounds of copper wire. And he rolled it into a club and hit me in the head with it and gave me a concussion. And he's saying, I don't want to see you get hurt. So I went home. And I just remember I was crying all the way home, crying tears of frustration, tears of what was going on, all of that. And so the next day was the endless mockery of, you ran away like a little pussy and all of that. And, you know, because there's no winning when this is happening to you. There's no way to win in this scenario. But that's the thing that still blows my mind to this day. I believe Tim, the kid who gave me the concussion, I believe when he said he didn't want to hurt me, he was just joining in like everybody else did. He didn't want to hurt me. Sam didn't want to hurt me. I don't even think Brian pushing me into the fence was because he wanted to hurt me. It was just what everybody did. It was the dance where everybody was in their place and you did your role. In a very sickening sense, I think of what happened in 1930s Germany and think this is exactly that same mindset. And the same thing going on in other parts of the world today. Looking in the monitor and see my Ukraine hat. I mean, it's what Russia does. It's what the Russian people do. What these bullies did. But the reason I'm bringing it up is, as the victim in this case, I was no different because I was just like them in the belief that this was what was supposed to be happening to me. There was a reason that the principal, superintendent, person in charge said that I would not get in trouble if I fought back, because I wasn't fighting back. And I wasn't fighting back because I didn't feel like I was supposed to. But when my coat got ripped, that was something that was not supposed to happen. My mom was not supposed to have been hurt by these kids. And then I was going to take my stand. But me getting hit, that was supposed to happen. And I can't explain that now. I can't describe or really justify what it's like to be that broken inside, internally, that you accept abuse, that it's normative to you, that it's the way things are supposed to be. But the bullies knew that that was true, and I knew it. And the thing is, I've talked to multiple therapists through the years, beginning when I thought I had insomnia. I mean, you can see now, I hope, why, having gone through that, I would have expected the mental cost for the insomnia. These were the memories my brain was tormenting me with when I couldn't fall asleep. But the scariest part of all this is I've had 3 different independent therapists spread out over a decade who didn't know each other at all independently tell me that my behavior when the bullying began is suspiciously indicative of a very specific form of trauma. Because, see, while I don't remember how the abuse started in school, what I do know is I didn't tell my parents about it. I didn't tell my teachers about it. I didn't tell the school authorities. I didn't tattle. And they only found out as the bullying increased in frequency and became more and more widespread. I didn't fight back. I didn't seek to oppose the people who were doing it. This is not normal. This is not the normal reaction to a kid who is healthy being punched on the playground. It is the normal response for somebody who has been victimized in a specific type of abuse that YouTube doesn't find very advertiser friendly. And all I can say on that is, if it happened, I don't remember any of it. I'm positive it would not have been anyone in my immediate family because I trust all of them fully. And at the worst of the times that I went through, I only felt safe when I was with them. But having 3 different independent psychological authorities saying this is a very common result of this certain other thing that's happened, and we don't see it very common at all when it happens exactly the way you were talking about it, is there's no other way to put it. It's just scary to hear that, because what happens in the voids that you can't remember. So that wraps up the backstory. It brings me to the point of why I'm making this video. I know it's a bit long-winded, but the journey is what it is. Because when I say that since 2006, every winter especially has been a living hell for me, I mean it. I have suffered from seasonal affective disorder. As the days get shorter and I get less sunlight and the temperatures drop and it gets colder, my depression gets worse and worse and worse. And I would struggle with these thoughts, these feelings, these emotions. Even after getting the CPAP and having the insomnia itself cured, it didn't stop all the thoughts that had come up, that had been brought to mind, the memories that I did have to deal with. And then I got married, and my daughter aside, that was the worst thing that could have happened to me. But I'm not going to go into any of that because it involves another person, doesn't need to be dragged into this. What I will simply say is that I love the time I get to spend with my daughter. And I would go through everything that I did go through, including all the stuff that I've just mentioned now, whatever it was. I would go through it all again because I know that it has been necessary so that my daughter exists. And her existence is a good thing in this world. It's worth me going through what I went through for her to be. But processing through the divorce when all that happened was nearly as bad for me as what I went through in school. And I felt like a sandy shore, no stones on it, just sand being relentlessly hammered by hurricane wave after hurricane wave. And then, ironically, COVID happened. We were locked up. We were isolated. And I say this is ironic because, while I know for the vast majority of people, this was the absolute worst thing that could have happened for them mentally. For me, it turned out to be a blessing. Because after COVID, I had health issues that kept me hospitalized. And then after my surgery, I was forced to stay in isolation even longer. So it wasn't just the quarantine. It was months and months. It was 18 months of that. And I had nothing to do except to process everything. I had to feel the emotions. I had to churn through everything that had happened, all the failures I felt, all the horror, all the CPTSD that I was going through, all of it. And I do think this is key. It felt extremely overwhelming at times, but the only way through the emotional pain is to feel it, not to block it, not to bottle it in, to deny it. And when you have hours and hours alone and there's no one around, you're isolated because your family is gone. My parents in Ukraine at the time, my ex in a different state with my daughter. I only had my cats to hear as I was crying out to God, how I didn't understand what was going on, how no one could expect me to go through all of this, how it just wasn't fair. And it didn't matter that the same conversation happened 5 times last week or that it was going to happen 6 more times before the end of the month. It was just me and God processing and processing. So 2 years ago, winter came and went, and I didn't experience seasonal affective disorder at all. This past winter, same thing. In the middle of this past winter, I spoke with the latest therapist that I've had, and we concluded that I no longer need his services, that I've gone through what I've gone through. I've reached a point that I've experienced what I've needed to experience through my pain, that I processed it, that I categorized it, that I've mentally come with my coping mechanisms, that I no longer feel overwhelmed by any of this, and I'm no longer trying to block anything. I still don't remember any of the alleged potential abuse that appears to have been the precursor to all of this, but I don't need to. I don't need to remember any of it. I'm not healed from that trauma, but now when it pops its head up, it's not just stuffed back down into an already full box waiting to burst at the seams. It's processed. I let myself feel it. And yeah, it looks ugly from time. You tears streaming down your face, let this snot drip from your nose when you're letting it out. There's no one around. You just process it. And when it runs its course, I set it down. So I find it interesting that YouTube is recommending me Hi Ren. I recommend that you listen to it though. I'm not a review channel or I play it here, but at the end of the song, Ren made the point that as he grew older, he learned how not to fight against the pendulum of darkness, but to be fluid and flexible. And it was the phrase, as I grew older, that resonated with me, because I don't think what I've done here is some magical skill. It's just that I'm older now. I've had time. And, when I heard NF's new song, Hope, I started thinking the same thing, how he's changed as he's gotten older. And I realized there is a bit of truth to that old adage that time heals all wounds. The thing is, we want our immediate fix. We want our salvation to have been yesterday. And yes, to endure another day is so very, very difficult. And people who feel mentally at their weakest show just by the fact that they complete their day that they are stronger than 99% of the world who could not endure that, but they feel the weakest. And where is the hope for them? It comes in the promise of morning. Yes, it feels really far off, but the sun is going to rise. And the thing is, I know how all these words sound. They sound hollow. They sound trite. If you're in the midst of dark times, this is nothing. This is you don't know how I feel. Maybe for you it was that way, but for me it's different. I know all of that because I rejected these same words when I heard them when I was in that place. Yet today I look back on it and go, that those words were true. Those cliches were true. So if you're in a dark place in your life, it's okay. It's okay to feel pain. It's okay to feel loss. It's okay to hope that things will change. It's okay not to believe anything that I'm saying when I tell you that the sun is going to rise. It's okay to relapse when you felt like you were improving and suddenly today is worse than yesterday. It's okay to feel like you've got nothing left, that you can't move another inch. Because as true as all of that is, the pain that you feel is real. There is also another truth that can't be denied. What you're going through, you are not alone. You are not alone. That is the way that it happens for people. I went through it. Other people can go through it too. And it sucks. That's the truth. But you can be honest with it. It sucks. It hurts. And it's not you by yourself. You're not the problem. You're not a problem at all. People care. And you are not alone.